Picture the year 2013. Jeff Bezos sits down for an interview on 60 Minutes and shows the world a small drone that delivers a package to someone's doorstep just 30 minutes after they order it. The host is stunned. The internet explodes with headlines. The future has arrived. Amazon promises that within a few years, drones will fly over our heads as routinely as mail carriers walk our streets. More than a decade has passed since then, and if you walked outside right now, in practically any city in the world, you almost certainly wouldn't see a single drone carrying a package. So what happened? Did Amazon lie? Did the technology turn out to be an impossible dream? Or maybe, and this is far more interesting, the drama is still unfolding right now while you're watching this video. Today we're going to unpack the full story of Amazon Prime Air, from a bold promise to hundreds of thousands of real-world flights, from drones crashing into swimming pools to federal investigations, from technical failures to a surprising fact. The program is actually still alive, still expanding right now in 2026, and is even about to reach Britain. Stay until the end. That's where it gets really interesting. Why this project could either become the biggest logistics revolution of the decade, or turn into the most expensive failure in Amazon's history. Let's start at the beginning. The idea of drone delivery isn't new. People were dreaming about it as far back as the mid-20th century. But it was Amazon that turned this idea into a very public race. December 2013. Jeff Bezos announces Prime Air as a concept. Drones weighing a few kilograms, autonomously delivering small packages within 30 minutes of checkout. At the time, this sounded like science fiction. Regulators didn't even have rules for commercial drones operating in residential areas. The U.S. Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, was literally unable to keep pace with the company's ambitions. The following years turned into a slow, largely invisible struggle. Amazon built testing grounds in the UK, in Canada, and later at its own research facilities in the US, including in Oregon. The company developed its own drone models one after another. The one Malawian Kwacha, the two Malawian Kwachas, and so on, each one faster, quieter, and smarter than the last. There were headline moments too. In 2016, Amazon carried out its first public test delivery in the UK. A customer received a popcorn maker and a bag of chips. The event received wide coverage, but it remained a one-off experiment rather than a real service. Years went by without a large-scale commercial service appearing. Critics started joking that Prime Air was the eternal next year's project. The program survived executive departures and turnover, changed its technical concept for the drones several times, and ran into the core problem that haunts any company wanting to fly over people's heads: safety and regulation. Testing a drone over an empty field is one thing. Trusting a machine to fly autonomously over residential neighborhoods, playgrounds, power lines, and parked cars is an entirely different matter. And yet, despite all the delays, Amazon never abandoned the idea. Instead, the company started operating more quietly, more cautiously, and that approach eventually delivered its first real breakthrough. December 2022. After nearly a decade of development, Amazon finally launches a genuine commercial drone delivery service in two small American towns, Lockford, California, and College Station, Texas. These were deliberately chosen as small, sparsely populated locations, a kind of open-air laboratory where the company could refine the technology away from dense urban development and the intense scrutiny of the media. By this point, Amazon had already introduced a new drone model, the 30 Malawian Kwachas. This is an aircraft weighing about 38 kilograms, capable of carrying packages up to 2.5 kilograms, reaching speeds over 100 kilometers per hour and flying at altitudes above 60 meters. The drone was designed to be quieter than its predecessors. Amazon emphasized that noise reduction was critical if neighbors were going to accept living under its flight paths at all. Here's how a delivery actually worked. A customer orders an item weighing up to 2 kilograms through the app. The drone takes off from a nearby micro-warehouse, flies along a pre-calculated route, hovers over the customer's yard at a height of several meters, and lowers the package on a tether or a small onboard lift before flying back. There's no landing in the yard, just a quick hover and a controlled drop. Delivery time ranged from 30 minutes to 2 hours, depending on system load. The first months of operation were cautious and slow, a few dozen deliveries a day, a limited radius, a limited product range. But this was now reality, not a conference stage demo. Prime Air finally existed. By late 2024, the service took its first major step toward scale, launching in Phoenix, Arizona, in the suburb of Tolleson, giving customers access to more than 50,000 products. This was already something quite different, not a test town of a few thousand residents, but part of a large metropolitan area. It seemed Amazon had finally found the formula. But that's exactly when a string of events began that nearly buried the entire project. December 2024. At Amazon's testing site in Oregon, an event occurs that would mark the beginning of the darkest period in Prime Air's history. 230 Malawian Quachas drones crashed during testing. The cause? A malfunction in the LiDAR sensors, the very sensors the drone uses to see the ground and determine its altitude. In rainy conditions, the sensors mistakenly interpreted raindrops as the ground surface. The drone concluded it had already landed at an altitude of more than 60 meters and simply shut off its propellers. Picture that for a second. An aircraft flying at the height of a 20-story building, and its onboard computer suddenly thinks it has already touched down. The result? A fall from that height. In January 2025, Amazon voluntarily suspended all commercial flights in both cities operating at the time, Tolleson and College Station. This was the first major warning sign. A company that had spent years trying to prove its technology was ready was now forced to admit a critical technical flaw. The fix took 2 months. In March 2025, the FAA approved a software update, and flights resumed. It seemed the worst was behind them, but 2025 had other plans. In May, a drone performed what Amazon called a precautionary controlled landing near an apartment complex in Tolleson, essentially an emergency landing in the wrong place. In July, one of the drones dropped a customer's package straight into a swimming pool during a delivery in Avondale. This became one of the most viral incidents of the year. It's easy to imagine how strange it looks for a box to fall from the sky directly into someone's pool. Then, in October 2025, an incident occurred that shook the entire industry. 230 Malawian Quachas drones, flying one behind the other on their way back to base, collided with the boom of a construction crane in Tolleson. Both fell. One caught fire on impact. Fortunately, there were no serious injuries, though one person was examined for smoke inhalation. Amazon voluntarily suspended flights, and the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, and the FAA opened official investigations. What did the investigation find? According to the NTSB, both drones mistakenly decided they had already landed due to incorrect altitude readings following the installation of new software, and, just as in December 2024, automatically shut off their engines. One fell from a height of 66 meters, the other from 56. So this wasn't the same rain-related glitch as before, but a new one, tied to a different software update. To an outside observer, it looked troublingly similar. Once again, a problem with determining where the ground is. Once again, an automatic mid-air engine shutdown. Amazon paused operations for only 48 hours before resuming flights. But just 10 days later, in Goodyear, Arizona, a drone made an unplanned landing on a sidewalk, about 1.5 meters from a resident who was checking his mailbox. A few weeks later, in November 2025, in yet another city, Waco, Texas, a drone severed an internet cable during a delivery, just 13 days after the service had launched in that city. The FAA opened its second investigation in 2 months. Let's count together. December 2024, 2 crashes in Oregon. January 2025, a complete shutdown of the program. May, an emergency landing near an apartment complex. July, a package in a swimming pool. October, a collision with a crane and a fire. 10 days later, a landing on a sidewalk a step away from a person. November, a severed cable. 6 significant incidents in less than a year. Journalists and analysts began asking a pointed question. Is autonomous technology even ready for the chaotic reality of residential neighborhoods, with their cranes, power lines, swimming pools, and people who simply walk out to check their mail? And here is the key turning point of our story. For almost any other company, at this stage, you'd expect either the project to be scrapped or at least sharply scaled back for years. Amazon chose a different path. Here it's important to understand something crucial. For Amazon, Prime Air isn't just a marketing gimmick or a side experiment. It's part of a much larger strategy. Amazon CEO Andy Jassy has publicly stated plans to expand drone delivery coverage to 30 million customers by the end of 2026 and to reach 500 million deliveries a year by the end of the decade, all within 30 minutes of ordering. This fits into the broader evolution of Amazon's logistics. The company has built more than 85 so-called same-day fulfillment centers, which stock roughly 90,000 of its most popular products and serve as launch pads for both delivery vans and drones. In this model, drones aren't a separate toy. They're part of a much larger machine for fast delivery that already enables hundreds of millions of same-day deliveries overall. In other words, the stakes for Amazon are extremely high. Giving up on drones would mean admitting technological defeat to its competitors, and competitors are certainly not sitting idle. Alphabet, Google's parent company, runs its own service called Wing, which by 2026 had already completed hundreds of thousands of commercial deliveries across the US, Australia, and Finland, including flights beyond the operator's visual line of sight in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. Zipline, a company originally focused on medical logistics in Africa, has crossed the 1 million autonomous delivery mark and is actively entering the American market, including through a partnership with Walmart. The Irish company Mana and several other players are also expanding actively across Europe. In other words, the question is no longer, will drone delivery happen at all? It's who will do it safely, at scale, and win the trust of regulators and consumers first. And Amazon, despite all the crashes and investigations, is clearly not ready to concede that race. So instead of shutting things down, the company chose a strategy: publicly acknowledge every incident, implement technical fixes, temporarily suspend operations in the specific region where a failure occurred, and keep expanding in other regions where there were no problems. It's a risky strategy from a reputational standpoint, Every new incident immediately feeds an already long list of grievances. But from a business standpoint, it lets Amazon keep its momentum. And now for the most interesting part. Where does all of this actually stand as of mid-2026, right now, as you're watching this? Contrary to the impression the crash timeline might give, Prime Air hasn't just survived, it's actively expanding. As of summer 2026, the service is operating out of 8 facilities serving 7 communities in the U.S. San Antonio, Waco, and Dallas in Texas, Phoenix, Arizona, Tampa, Florida, and 2 locations in the Detroit area, Pontiac and Hazel Park, plus Kansas City. In summer 2026, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, was added to that list, the program's first Gulf Coast market outside Florida, and in late July, service launched in Omaha, Nebraska, in the suburb of Papillion. The expansion logic follows a clear pattern. Start with a small suburb, deploy 12 to 20 drones per facility, offer a delivery radius of roughly 12 kilometers, and charge about $5 per delivery for Prime members and $10 for everyone else. The product range, items under 2.5 kilograms, is mostly household goods, over-the-counter medicine, baby products, small gifts, and short shelf-life groceries. In other words, exactly the kind of thing people are willing to pay a small premium for speed on, not a large order that would arrive by van anyway. The company has also confirmed plans for new markets. The southern suburbs of Chicago are gearing up for launch, and Metro Atlanta is under consideration, where, notably, competitor Wing is already active. And there's another interesting twist: international expansion. In 2026, Amazon launched its first service outside the U.S., in Darlington, in northeast England. This is a significant step. British and, more broadly, European regulators have traditionally been more cautious than American ones about drones flying over residential areas. And, of course, the story of incidents hasn't ended on the American continent. In July 2026, an 30 Malawian Kwacha's drone crashed into a private garden in Darlington during the UK trial phase. This immediately triggered an investigation by the UK's Air Accidents Investigation Branch, AIB. Darlington's local council had already cut the company's authorized flight frequency from 21 to 10 per hour due to concerns about the scope of the trials, and now has another reason to demand a full review of emergency landing protocols before allowing any further expansion. So the picture as of August 2026 looks like this. Amazon is simultaneously expanding faster than ever and continuing to run into incidents that draw regulatory attention on both sides of the Atlantic. This isn't a story with a clean ending, a clear success, or failure. It's a story still unfolding in real time, with an undetermined outcome that it's worth pausing to honestly ask. Why did drone delivery turn out to be so much harder than it seemed back in 2013? First, it's a literal last-mile problem. Flying over an open field is a trivial task for modern avionics. Flying over an actual residential neighborhood is a different story entirely. A crane that appeared there yesterday and isn't on any obstacle map. A power line barely visible against the sky. A trampoline set up in the middle of a yard just that morning. A swimming pool. A tree that grew taller over the summer. Or a neighbor's own quadcopter flying nearby. Every single yard is a unique, constantly changing environment, and no database can keep up with these changes in real time. Second, there's the fundamental complexity of autonomous decision-making systems. When a drone decides it has landed at an altitude of 60 meters, that's not a simple mechanical failure. It's a logic failure in an algorithm misinterpreting conflicting sensor data. And when you're talking about hundreds of thousands of flights a year, even a very rare error, say 1 in 10,000 flights, becomes, at scale, a regular source of headlines. Third, and this is probably the most important point, society's tolerance for mistakes made by autonomous systems is much lower than its tolerance for human error. When a van driver makes a mistake, gets into an accident, or drops a package in a puddle, it rarely becomes national news. When a robotic drone does the same thing, it instantly becomes a symbol, proof that the technology isn't ready yet, or that you can't trust AI. That's not necessarily fair statistically, but psychologically it's a reality Amazon has to fight just as hard as the technical problems themselves. And finally, there's regulatory complexity. The FAA, the UK CAA, local municipalities, they all have different authorities, different safety criteria, and each incident gives them new grounds to restrict flight frequency, narrow service areas, or demand additional inspections. Darlington had already halved its allowed flights per hour long before the most recent crash. That means even if Amazon solves every technical problem, the pace of expansion will still ultimately be dictated not by the company's engineers, but by local authorities and aviation agencies. If there's one more piece of this story we haven't touched yet, and it might be the most important one of all, money. Because behind every crash headline and every new city launch, there's a financial reality that rarely makes it into the news, and it's brutal. Back in 2022, Bloomberg published an investigation based on internal Amazon documents, government filings, and interviews with more than a dozen current and former employees. By that point, Amazon had already spent more than $2 billion on Prime Air and had assembled a team of over 1,000 people worldwide, and the company still hadn't launched a real commercial service. The investigation described a program plagued by technical setbacks, high staff turnover, and constant internal disagreement about the right direction for the technology. But the number that really puts things in perspective came later. Internal projections leaked in 2022 suggested that by 2025, Amazon would be losing $63 on every single package it delivered by drone. $63. On a delivery, the company charges customers somewhere between $5 and $15 for, depending on Prime membership status. Some industry estimates have painted an even starker picture, suggesting the true cost per delivery could run past $200 once you account for the infrastructure, staffing, aircraft, and constant software iteration behind each flight. Think about what that actually means in practice. Every time your neighbor gets a bottle of sunscreen dropped in their backyard buying 30 Malawian kwaches, Amazon isn't just breaking even on a cool piece of tech. It's absorbing a loss that could be tens of dollars or more per package. Multiply that by the goal of 500 million annual deliveries by the end of the decade, and you start to see why this program still isn't public about its unit economics. When journalists ask directly how unprofitable Prime Air currently is, Amazon has consistently declined to give a number, describing it only as deeply unprofitable in earnings context. So why would a public company, accountable to shareholders every quarter, keep pouring money into something this expensive? Partly because Amazon has a long, well-documented history of doing exactly that, running businesses at a loss for years while they mature. The same playbook that turned AWS from a costly experiment into Amazon's most profitable division, and the same logic behind years of thin retail margins while the company built out its logistics network. Andy Jassy has been explicit about this philosophy in recent shareholder letters. Some companies, he said, spend months arguing about which future bet to make and end up pursuing none of them. while Amazon would rather run several expensive experiments in parallel. Drone delivery, ultra-fast 20-minute delivery through a separate initiative called Amazon Now, and traditional same-day logistics. And let the market eventually tell it which one scales. There's also a simpler, more human explanation buried in the numbers. Current constraints are largely artificial, not physical. Right now, each 30 Malawian kwaches can only carry one item at a time, can only fly during daylight hours, needs about 3 square meters of open space to hover safely over, and can't operate in bad weather. Every one of those restrictions inflates the cost per delivery because it limits how many packages a single drone and a single human operator overseeing it can process per day. If Amazon manages to lift even a few of these restrictions, say, enabling limited night flights, or letting one operator safely supervise a larger fleet of drones simultaneously, the cost per delivery could fall dramatically without requiring any fundamentally new technology at all. That's the bet Amazon is actually making. Not that drones are cheap today, but that they'll become cheap enough tomorrow, the same way cloud computing, ebook readers, and same-day delivery all looked financially absurd in their first few years. Of course, that bet only pays off if the safety problems from Part 3 get solved along the way. A program that's simultaneously bleeding money per delivery and generating a steady stream of crash headlines has a much shorter runway with investors and regulators than one that's merely expensive. That's really the tension sitting at the heart of Prime Air in 2026. Amazon needs both time and trust to make the economics work, and every new incident spins down some of that trust just as fast as the company can rebuild it through new city launches that is so. Back to the question we asked at the start of this video. Did Amazon lie back in 2013? No, not exactly. The technology works, for real, every day, thousands of times over. Did the dream turn out to be unachievable? Also no. It just turned out to be far slower, far more expensive, and far more dangerous in the details than anyone predicted 12 years ago. The truth lies somewhere in between, and honestly, that's what makes this story so interesting. It's not a story of triumph, and it's not a story of failure. It's the story of a company that, literally right now, as you're watching this, is still balancing on the line between a major technological breakthrough and a string of very public setbacks. Every month brings either a launch in a new city or a new incident that once again calls the whole approach into question. What happens next? If Amazon truly manages to bring the MK30 safety up to a level acceptable to regulators and the public, we'll likely see drone delivery become a normal part of life before the end of this decade. Not a futuristic novelty, but as routine a service as same-day van delivery is today. But if incidents continue at the pace we saw in 2025 and 2026, regulators on both sides of the Atlantic could significantly rein in the company's ambitions, and then competitors like Wing or Zipline, which have so far operated more cautiously and with fewer high-profile failures, could end up a step ahead. One thing is certain. The story of Amazon Prime Air is a great reminder of just how much harder it is to turn an ambitious tech dream into reality than it is to put it on a slide in a presentation. And at the same time, it's proof that even after a string of very public failures, a large company with enough resources doesn't necessarily give up. What do you think? Will drone delivery become a normal part of our everyday lives? Or is this a technology destined to remain a niche experiment? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Hit like if you enjoyed this video, and subscribe to the channel. There are plenty more stories coming about technologies that promise to change the world. See you in the next video.